You're celebrating. Fireworks on screens, noise everywhere. The calendar flipping forward like it always does, and nothing feels unusual about that. It never does, because transitions aren't designed to feel unusual. They're designed to feel normal, almost invisible. While everyone is focused on the noise, the system underneath has already started moving. Not abruptly, not violently, quietly, methodically, because this isn't a new year, it's a transition. And transitions don't interrupt routines, they slide underneath them. They don't announce themselves, they don't trigger alarms, because alarms create attention, and attention creates resistance. If this were a crisis, they would warn you, loudly, repeatedly. Crisis needs panic to justify action, but transitions don't need panic. They need silence, cooperation, fatigue. Right now, the numbers still look familiar. Prices feel high but explainable, uncomfortable but survivable. 9.5%, a number you've already learned to live with, a number you've been told is temporary, cyclical, manageable. But 9.5% isn't a statistic. It's a process. It's extraction happening slowly enough that it feels like friction instead of loss. Because if this were inflation, you'd recognize the pattern. If this were collapse, there would be chaos. If this were an emergency, someone would already be blamed. But this isn't any of those things. This is controlled, managed, coordinated. And that's where Davos gets misunderstood. People think it's where decisions are made. It's not. Decisions don't need a stage. They need alignment. Davos isn't a conference. It's a coordination layer, a place where outcomes are synchronized without ever being announced. Nothing is voted on. Nothing is signed. Nothing is declared. And that absence is intentional, because visible decisions can be resisted. Invisible alignment just produces outcomes that feel accidental, inevitable, as if no one really decided anything at all. And when you look back across decades, you start noticing something uncomfortable. Different years, different crises, different explanations, identical results, more consolidation, less flexibility, higher dependency, fewer real options, because the language changes, the incentives don't. And that's why focusing on policy misses the point. Power doesn't obsess over what, it controls when, because timing governs reaction, not law. Pressure is applied slowly, continuously, until people adapt emotionally, until outrage gives way to exhaustion. And once exhaustion sets in, resistance collapses on its own. That's when change is introduced, not at the height of anger, but after fatigue. Because exhausted people don't organize, they adjust. And this is why the dollar narrative works so well as a distraction. Collapsing currencies are loud. Panic is unpredictable. But currencies are just containers. What actually matters is behavior, because money only has power if people behave the way the system expects them to behave. Spend here, borrow now, wait longer, comply quietly. And people don't lose power when money disappears. They lose it when options disappear, when saying no becomes expensive, when waiting feels dangerous. That's leverage. And leverage doesn't require collapse. It requires predictability, which is why institutions don't want chaos. They want dependency, because dependency is stable. Debt, inflation, fear, these aren't accidents. They're tools. Tools that compress optionality until compliance feels rational, which is why nothing ever really gets fixed. Problems aren't solved when they're useful. They're managed, extended, normalized. Just enough relief to prevent revolt. Just enough pressure to prevent independence. And this is why 2026 isn't another 2008 or 2020. Those were expansion phases. The answer was always more. More liquidity, more credit, more future pulled into the present. But expansion has limits. Consolidation doesn't announce itself. It tightens rules quietly, narrows access gradually, removes flexibility one requirement at a time. Systems don't warn during consolidation, because warnings create resistance. So waiting feels safe, even as options disappear. But waiting only works during expansion. During consolidation, waiting is exposure. And this is what happens when you do nothing. Not collapse, not sudden loss, narrowing, fewer choices, less leverage, freedom inside smaller boundaries. Not because you failed, but because the environment changed around you. Most people mistake stability for safety. They trust timelines. They trust that someone will intervene. But the real damage doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from misplaced trust. Because systems don't correct trajectories people are already adapting to. And that leads to the part no one ever votes on. Nobody consents to transitions explicitly. There's no referendum, no announcement, no moment where permission is requested. Silence becomes agreement. Not because people approve, but because nothing feels urgent enough to resist. And that's the question you're left with. Not what they're deciding in Davos, but at what point does not resisting stop being passive and start becoming agreement?